College football nerds here talking Big Ten championship. It's Indiana, it's Ohio State, and big noon kickoff is going to be there, Josh, and game day is not. And people are saying that it's because of SEC bias. I think there's something interesting here that I want to talk about, so y'all don't leave me. I don't think there's as much interest in this game as historically there would have been. And I don't think it has anything to do with Indiana or Ohio State. I think it has to do with the fact that we have a 12-team playoff now, and right now we've got 1 and 2, Indiana, Ohio State, and whoever wins this game is going to be number 1, and whoever loses this game is still probably going to have a first-round bye. So the intrigue throughout the country maybe isn't there, but the intrigue for the teams, for the Big Ten fans and the Indiana fans wanting, I think this is for their first Big Ten championship since 1967 or something like that. It's a big deal. But I think the dynamics of the playoffs have maybe made this a little less of a big deal, and partly due to the fact of how good of these seasons these two teams have had.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of facet that when you look at this game, I feel like it's actually getting less hyped than the Ohio State-Michigan game did last week. When you really think about it, compared to the Alabama-Georgia game, I think it's maybe getting less attention nationally at times, which is kind of weird. There's a whole discussion about game day being down there for the SEC championship, while Big Noon Kickoff is the Big Ten. One thing I think it kind of makes sense. You have the two different things at the two biggest games that both networks are airing. It's not shocking. I don't consider that a conspiracy theory. But the other thing that I think flies under the radar is the Alabama-Georgia game at least felt like it had some stakes, because whether Alabama wins or loses probably is going to determine whether they make the playoffs. That was the narrative. We have a whole other video out there for that SEC championship game where we go into the fact that Vegas odds are now indicating, and I'm recording this before the Tuesday playoff rankings, for what it's worth. We're recording this on Monday night. I don't think it's going to matter. I think Alabama's about to jump Notre Dame because the Vegas odds are ridiculously minus 3,000 for Alabama to make the playoff. The only way that makes sense is that's 98% chance for Alabama, is that Alabama's going to jump Notre Dame this week before the game's played. But outside that, it seems like it's a bigger game. And Daniel, when I really got to thinking about it, it's because there's no stakes. If Ohio State had lost to Michigan, Ohio State would have still made the playoff, but they would have been a considerably worse seed, right? I mean, that was going to determine, where Ohio State's ranking was in the conference. For the conference race, it was going to determine whether or not Ohio State was undefeated at the top of the rankings, to have an early round bye. Ohio State's schedule, look, we've said this all the time. You can be an elite team and have a weak schedule. Let me just get it out there for both teams. They both have weak schedules. Ohio State and Indiana do not have as hard a schedule, top to bottom, as a lot of teams in the SEC. They've also dominated that schedule in a way that no one in the SEC has done. So, 2014 Ohio State had a very weak schedule and, ran, 80 yards through the South, right? Like, it doesn't really matter. Clemson had a really weak schedule in 2018 and took it to Alabama. So cast that aside. But if Ohio State had lost the game with the schedule they had, they would have fallen quite a bit in the rankings. So that Ohio State-Michigan game had real stakes to people. If Ohio State loses to Indiana, they may just flip who's first and second. And they both get a bye. They're not going to fall behind Oregon, who didn't make the conference championship game. And India, by the way, already beat Oregon. It's just not going to happen. So, I think there's this big discussion about, the conference championships games need to go away because the SEC championship is going to cost Alabama a slot in the playoff, yada, yada. One, don't think that's going to end up being true, as it turns out. Two, I think, there's something to be said that if you're worried about it costing you a game because you don't want to play games, maybe that's kind of the wrong motivation. Though I understand, I have a different perspective when Alabama and Georgia are having to play each other in a rematch in the conference championship game. That does feel a little bit unnecessary. But three, I actually think the Ohio State-Indiana game may be the better argument for not needing a conference championship game. Because Ohio State and Indiana are playing a game purely for, you say seeding, but 1 to 2 seed, depending on how the rest of the rankings shake out, we've seen this in prior years. It may not even really be that the 1 seed is a better set of seeding than the 2 seed, especially given that, like if BYU beats, or Duke were to beat Virginia, I should say, if Duke beat Virginia, you're going to get 2 G5s in the playoff because Duke is not going to get ranked, which means the highest ranked conference champions will be 2 G5s over Duke. Now the 1 and 2 seed both play a G5, and it really doesn't matter. And so it's this game. I hate to say it, I'm going to kill our own views. So like and subscribe for us being honest. If you appreciate the honesty here, this game's an exhibition. And if you're an Ohio State and Indiana fan, and you're probably like, hey, this isn't an exhibition. Winning your conference is a big deal. We've been around a long time. This has always mattered. It's Big Ten country. Pounding your fist on the table. Look, man, we're in the 12-team playoff era anymore. This ain't Schembechler era, okay? Maybe when it was a 14 playoff, it really mattered. Certainly when it was the BCS era and only 2 teams made the championship game, it mattered. Before then, it mattered a whole lot. In the 12-team playoff game, I don't think anybody really cares. I mean, Ohio State fans, you were sitting at home, and you were mad for about a week that you didn't make the conference championship game. Maybe a couple weeks, okay, through the first round. The moment you blasted Tennessee into an orange oblivion, I don't think you really cared that much anymore. And when you blasted Oregon, you really didn't care that much anymore because at that point it became clear, yeah, you were really a better team than the other teams in the Big Ten. You had a bad game against Oregon early in the season. You blasted Indiana. It was just a scheduling quirk that you had a much harder schedule than the rest of the Big Ten. That was the only reason you didn't make the championship game. This year, yeah, one of you is going to be crowned Big Ten champion. But the reality is it is an exhibition. You're both going to make the playoffs. You're both going to have first-round byes in the playoff. I don't even think if one team gets blasted 60-0, it's just going to be a credit to the other team. And so, what does it really matter when the only game that's going to really matter is the rematch that you might possibly face in the playoff itself? This is just an exhibition, and if the teams are as good as we expect them to be, there's a good chance it's the first of 2 games they're going to play in the next few months, and the one that doesn't matter. All that said, Daniel, and we predicted that I'll have a 7-minute rant because it's 11:30 at night, and I'm exhausted, don't know where I am. Wonders of having a 1-year-old. I do think there's a lot to be said in this game because, one, it's going to be interesting to see number 1 play number 2. As a college football purist, I care about the game just from that perspective. And 2, Daniel, I also think it's fascinating to me as an analytics guy and somebody who breaks down teams because offensively and defensively, these 2 teams are about to be stressed in ways that they haven't remotely been stressed all season. And this one game, to an almost certainly unfair degree, is going to give a huge window into how these teams are going to scale against playoff caliber competition. And all the complaints, and there really were not complaints, but just us trying to project these 2 teams as playoff teams all year, we finally get some data points that I can really use and interpret to figure out how Ohio State and Indiana are going to do in the playoff.
All those nice words about Ohio State is almost enough for them to come back and like you after a season of Julian Sayin slander.
I disowned that
really
like
slander.
6 weeks ago, and we still get comments. I mean, I look, I was wrong, and I was clearly wrong. But when it was halfway through the season, and he'd thrown 9 passes of 20 yards or more in like week 6. And then, of course, the next week they played Minnesota, and he went off every other week. I think he took it personally, but apparently every other Ohio State fan did too.
To your show. It's funny. Every time he throws a ball that's like 21 yards or more, we get somebody quote tweeting something you said from 2 months ago. Anyway, so we had a really interesting discussion pre-recording that I want to bring into this conversation here because there's a lot of discussion you're going to get in every other preview. You're not going to get this discussion we're about to have in any other preview, I promise. Because what people are going to talk about, and I think it's a very good talking point, is we thought the defensive test was going to be with Michigan. But if you look at the numbers, Michigan is a better defense on average than Ohio State has faced, but not a good defense. in terms of one that would really test an elite plus offense or an elite team. Indiana's got that. But what's interesting is last year, one of the things that plagued Indiana was the fact that their RPO heavy offense didn't scale against really good defenses. And we have seen that this year with Oregon, and we've seen it every year with Oregon, that their offense doesn't necessarily scale against really good defenses. The question is, one, Indiana probably understands this because if we know it, they know it. They know a lot more about their team and about college football than we do. But also, I was talking to you before we started recording. I said, Josh, college defensive coordinators see RPO a lot still because it is a good talent gap neutralizer, especially coming up from high school, and it kind of carries over. That's why there's a quarterback quality problem feeding the NFL right now. But Matt Patricia came from the NFL where they don't run a lot of RPO anymore because it got figured out. But you had a pretty good point about how some of that memory from when he was in the NFL might actually help them face an RPO heavy offense, even a good one like Indiana's. Josh, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Do you like paying full price for things, or do you prefer to save 10% when you can?
I mean, I'm a penny pitching lawyer. I love to save money where I can.
Well, you're in luck because we're partnering with SeatGeek this year. And with codes NERDS10, you can save 10% on tickets at SeatGeek. And they've got a lot of cool college football games. We're a college football channel. They also have other stuff like concerts and things like that. But we got Bama, Georgia coming up this weekend. I'm going to show it on the screen for people. We got the game at the end of the year, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Auburn, Iron Bowl. Even the cocktail party is going to have some tickets for y'all. So SeatGeek is partnering with us, and I'm just curious, any games that you want to see? You going to stay on your couch all year? You got something in mind?
Well, I've never really experienced human companionship, and also as a nerd, I've only ever watched box scores. So given that I'm probably going to pick LSU to win, I'd kind of like to go to an LSU game. I mean, don't you think they'd be excited to have me?
I'm probably more excited than Penn State fans would be to have you. But, Josh, there's a problem with this. I think we found a flaw in your system. You can get some good prices on tickets, but do you want to know what the problem is?
What's the problem, Daniel?
You'll have to wear pants.
Oh, I've never done that before. And also, I think I have to pick them to lose if they want me to come.
All right. So, of course, we got the code for y'all, Nerds10, to save 10% off on your next tickets at SeatGeek. Make sure you click on the link in the description and download the app, and you can have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. I want to thank SeatGeek. They've been a great partner. This is 2 years running with them. We appreciate it. Y'all go check them out.
Yeah, I mean, when you go through it historically, the RPO peaked, you put it at different periods, but started to hit college scene in the early 2010s, got picked up in the NFL 3 or 4 years after that, probably peaking around 2013. Auburn making the national title in 2013, running the RPO, was probably the biggest peak of it. It went through sort of variations from that point on for a few years. 2014, Alabama ran it with Lane Kiffin to some effect in the game. They obviously lost to Ohio State, but it was actually a pretty flawed Alabama team with bad quarterback play. Leaned a lot on Derrick Henry, but they leaned a lot on Derrick Henry running the ball in an RPO scheme that would chunk the ball over the top to Amari Cooper and kind of just loft it. And the whole goal was to get Amari Cooper wide open over the top, run the ball, or throw a screen pass. There wasn't a lot of traditional offense. They didn't really have a real passing tree, which is why Ohio State was kind of able to shut them down in that championship or semifinal game, not championship game. They did shut down Oregon, after that too, which again, RPO modern team. It started getting figured out, I think, in the NFL mid 2010s, like 2015, 2016, 2017. That coincided the same period where Kaepernick ended up out of the league. And there was a reason. Kaepernick was a really high-level quarterback for a couple years running the RPO in the NFL before it got figured out. They did figure it out, changed the way they did their alignments, changed personnel with hybrid safeties, stopped keying run pass at the safety level in a lot of fronts, have a hybrid player floating in that seam area to rob it, which takes away the read. And the whole goal, really, of the way you defend the RPO is really two sides. One, when you're outside the red zone, especially outside the 20-yard line, but even really all the way to the 40, you see a lot. You tell the safety, hey, don't ever crash run. You need to stay back. If there's a threat of RPO from the opposing offense, you've got to stay on your heels, because the last thing we want to do is get run by for an easy touchdown. The way RPOs scored a ton when they were at their heyday is they would have fast receivers with matchup advantages that would hit a safety playing flat-footed or watching the run, and when the receiver was even with the safety, you'd throw the ball, he'd run by him, score. And you saw Ohio State do it for teams a ton under Ryan Day, saw Alabama do it a ton. It was just hyper effective. Well, safety started playing back. You started playing more zone coverage, which is, again, trying to keep things over the top. You gave a little bit more to the run. You had linebackers play more in that coverage zone to take away the pass. But it was all based around the idea of you want to take away one of the two options and make it into a traditional offense. Because once you make it into a traditional problem of a run game or a passing game, you can stop it. Clemson in the 2018 game where they killed Alabama and Tagovailoa and the really high-level receiving core they had, they really kind of did the opposite, because they had probably the best defensive line in the last, 30 years. That group was truly generational and had a tremendous amount of seniority at the end of that season. They played with a really light box. They played like 5 or 6 guys in the box for most of that game, and they held Najee Harris to 4 or 5 yards a carry, like 5 yards a carry. But they were happy doing that through the 20s. When the field compressed, they played traditional defense, and Venables was able to pick them off. And all that was around the fact of, okay, we're going to take away the run and make you into a passing team. And if we know you're going to throw the ball, now we can run trap coverage in the back end and pick you off. Now we, in third down or third and long situations, we get you there, we can play it. It's all about making you into a traditional offense. And the reason is when you're an RPO team, in the run game, you're not really teaching man or even really true zone principles like duo, double team block gap principles, and you're not driving the defensive line. You're taught to sort of drop, block, and stop. So RPO teams typically aren't great at the power run game. Lincoln Riley does the best job of that, or did historically, which is why his offense was so effective. They were really effective because he did far more power run off the RPO than anybody else. That kind of got figured out. That's a story for a different day. But, that you're not really that good at running the ball. You don't do a ton of pin and pull if you're an RPO team. You don't really have time to teach it. You don't teach it that well. And in the passing game, usually when you see real heavy RPO teams, they're not real good at traditional pro-style passing trees. They don't make a lot of complicated reads. They're not doing high-low reads. They're not doing seam reads. They're not really reading coverage. You're reading players, not coverage. You're throwing to space. You're not throwing to holes in a zone off coverage. And so they struggle a little bit in traditional passing games. Maryland under Loxley, who was the guy that ran Alabama's offense in that 2018 season when they got blasted by Clemson in that championship game. You see that with Maryland. They're overly RPO dependent, in my opinion. They typically have a good passing game against certain teams, but when teams can take away one side or the other, you often see Maryland fall apart offensively, and the reason is they can't really run a traditional offense. Long-winded explanation, but as Daniel said, I don't think you're going to get that quite anywhere else, and it leads to my biggest concern for this game in particular for Indiana. Indiana is a heavily RPO-based offense. It's what Cignetti's installed. It's been very effective for them. But in my opinion, the RPO really shines when you have serious matchup advantages, and particularly when you can run the ball well enough and throw the ball well enough to where the other team can't really stop one or the other, right? Because when teams are struggling to deal with your pass game, you're going to be very effective running it. When you can run it well enough, even against something of a loaded box, they're going to just find it impossible to deal with your pass game. And so the yin and yang starts to play. A couple times this season, we've seen teams that were able to really stop the run more than anything, or win the line of scrimmage. That was Iowa and Penn State. Indiana struggled a lot offensively in those games, and I think the reason was really similar in both cases. The problem that Indiana had is that Penn State, partly by loading the line of scrimmage, but especially Iowa with their front, they were able to kind of control the run game and then play the back end as a traditional passing offense. And Penn State in particular brought a lot of extra guys. They brought a lot of heavy pressure. and they kind of trapped some of the RPO stuff. And Indiana couldn't really run the ball very effectively or deal with them in the front. And it turned Indiana having to play traditional passing offense under pressure, and they've struggled to do it a little bit. Even the Wisconsin game, which they did pull away in the second half throwing the football, they didn't really pull away until they started successfully blocking Wisconsin front on a consistent basis. So all that is to say, when you're overly modern, it doesn't make you a bad offense, but it makes you an offense that I get really concerned about whether or not you're going to scale. And if you followed this channel for years, you know we talk about scaling issues. And it's really panned out to be very true that a lot of teams offensively in college football struggle to take what they do against bad competition and then replicate it against good competition, even relative to the quality of good competition. And if you look at Indiana this year, threw for 10 yards per attempt on Iowa. They threw for 12.2 on Wisconsin. But the key in a lot of those games is even throwing for 10 or 12 yards per attempt. They didn't score but 20 points or 31 points, but it took a long time to get there. And it's because they ran for 2.7 on Iowa. They ran for 2.2 on Wisconsin. It's not consistent enough offensively if they're rendered one-dimensional. And going into this game versus an Ohio State team that is like FEI, this number, defensively, you're looking at the number 1 and number 3 defense. Texas Tech is the other elite defense nationally, along with Oklahoma. These are two teams that can stop you, and Ohio State is just especially good. Daniel, I am concerned coming out of the long rant. Regardless of everything else in this game, is Indiana going to really be able to score, or is this going to be another game like happened to them last year where they just feels like they run into a buzzsaw against really elite level defensive competition? They faced 4 top 40 defenses, both of these teams. The best that Indiana's faced in FEI is Iowa. Beyond that, that's the only top 20 defense they faced. The next best was Wisconsin. The others, oddly enough, Old Dominion was one. Is this going to be kind of a buzzsaw situation for Indiana offensively?
Y'all, Josh must be tired because I don't think in 10 years of doing this, he's ever done a 9-minute segment except for maybe a solo show. So this, y'all got Josh in rare form. I think it's interesting because this game, we talked about in the beginning in our open about how it feels like an exhibition game, but there's so much information that we can get from this game. And I do think that the point is fair. These teams have had easy schedules. I think, not to bring you back in because you probably need a break and a glass of water, but real quick, do you have, if you're ranking, not power rating, not anything else, if you're ranking, do you have Ohio State 1, Indiana 2? Right. I do too. So before y'all come at me, that's where I have these two teams. If I were, even whoever loses this game, I still have them as a bye, maybe drop them to third if, Georgia wins or whatever. But they still top 3 teams, even with a loss. Having said all that, these two teams have not played hard schedules. Indiana has played, I think, 2 finishing ranked teams in 24 regular season games. Ohio State, I think Texas is the only ranked team they play. Texas has played as many ranked Big Ten opponents as Indiana has played. That's crazy to me. So I say all that to say not that either one of these teams is bad because they played, weak schedules, but playing each other is going to force them to put stuff on tape and force them to show who they are. And it makes it really hard to pick this game because we don't know if Indiana has improved on who they were last year, that lost that game pretty comfortably and then lost in the playoffs pretty comfortably. But also, we've said this about Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt came out of nowhere last year and they were pretty good, but they weren't ready. This year, they are a much better team. They're not in the playoffs this year because they had a pretty tough schedule, but they're a much better team and they have, yeah, correct. They have a bad defense, but they're a much better team. Indiana could be that as well, where they kind of showed up on the scene last year, and then this year they are just they've improved on all the things that were deficiencies for them that kept them from being actually elite, which you're not going to do your first year out of the gate. So it makes it really hard to sort of handicap this game. By the way, Vegas doesn't think this is a blowout. If you pick somebody off the street, they're probably saying, yeah, double digits, Ohio State. I'm not ready to pick this game yet. I want to walk through the model and stuff like that, but I just want to say, like, it's hard to predict this game because of the schedules they played, but only because both of these teams have handled their schedules. We could glean a lot if Indiana or Ohio State were struggling every week against teams that everybody else was struggling against. We can't if they're just carpet bombing every one of them. So get us into the model and let's talk about matchups, and then we'll kind of pick this one.
26-18. You guys have heard it all before. Our model is based on per play statistics, based on totally opponent adjusted versions of statistics. You can look at our relative performance stats, which are not how well you've done, but how well you did against teams versus how well they did against everybody else. And we look at it where you 10% better or 10% worse, for example, than competition have been against the teams you played. And we use that to generate a projected outcome on a matchup-dependent basis for a game. Ohio State's at 5.2 yards per play. Indiana's at 4.8. Neither team expected to really do that well offensively either side of the ball. 7.4 per passing, 3.4 per carry for Ohio State. Indiana, 6.5 yards per attempt, 3.7 yards per carry. The notable thing, we've talked about consistency scores all year, Daniel. 9.26 and 9.36 for these two teams. And what that means is our model, not only do we take it and we run every team and we model you playing every other team in the country every week, and we create a projected record, and that's how we do our 1 through 136 rating in the model, which is interesting because you can have a team, number 8 might actually be predicted to lose to number 10, but it might be because number 8 can more consistently beat number 40 through number 136, or a matchup issue or something like that. But we also take every team and we run you against your prior schedule, and we say, how does our model's prediction match up with what you actually did against the teams you played? The consistency score indicates the correlation that exists there. 9 point whatever is low. The score is basically normalized somewhere out of 100. And what that means is that these two teams, as good as they've been, they don't really track that well with the model, believe it or not. They played a little bit up and down in competition. Some of this is due to the fact that, yes, there's a lot of garbage time, but our model does, in various ways, really take that into account. So I think it says something to the fact that both teams probably have some level of scaling up and down that's a little crazy. This gets into the other side of it too, Daniel. That we talked a lot about Indiana and the RPO and concerns there. Look, Ohio State's really been slowly moving away, I think, from a heavily RPO dependent offense. Really since Justin Fields left, when they were very RPO heavy. They're much more of a pro-style offense right now with Sayin, who's a very fast processor and a very quick trigger. But, everything we said about Indiana kind of holds true for Ohio State. I mean, when you look at FEI defenses, again, they've only played 4 of the top 40. Michigan's only 34th in FEI defense. They're just straight up, Michigan's really not a great defense this year. They've been struggled a lot, got lit up by USC. A number of times they've had issues. And then when you look past that, Wisconsin and Washington are 23 and 24th. The best defense they faced is Texas. Texas is a great elite run defense. They're actually pretty average against the pass this year. They're 13th in FEI. Behind Auburn, by the way, that Alabama just struggled with. Auburn's actually a better defense than Texas, for what it's worth. Indiana's sitting up there at 3rd themselves. So I think the other side of this from a model perspective in Vegas, which again is 4.5 points versus our 8, is there something to be said for the fact that Ohio State's played one top 20 level defense. That was Texas. They only scored 14 points. And we've said all year, it was week 1. And we've really kind of discounted it because week 1, new quarterback, slow start. But everybody also wants to say, well, we played a top 20 defense and we beat them. It's like, well, yeah, you beat them, but you didn't move the ball. So if you don't want to count Texas because it's week 1, you also have to admit that Ohio State hasn't played a top 20 defense and really hasn't played a high-level pass defense all year. And in Indiana, not only are they a good defensive team, But from a Big Ten perspective, Indiana's number 2 in the conference in sacks. They're a very active front. Minnesota's number 1, but Minnesota does that because their secondary sucks and they have to be overly aggressive. Their pass defense is actually awful. They just generate sacks. And so maybe the other side of this coin, Daniel, in this prediction, there's something to be said for the fact that Indiana presents a lot of challenges that Ohio State hasn't faced, just as much it was true the other way around.
Yeah, and that's kind of getting to what we were talking about at the beginning. We thought maybe Michigan might have done a little bit of that, but I was honestly shocked at how Michigan approached that game because Michigan got some opportunities early on and they were super conservative in the red zone. I'm like, y'all are not getting in the red zone the rest of the game. What are you doing? But defensively, Michigan is not who they have been. And I do think they are better defensively than what Ohio State has seen, but they are not Indiana. They are not some of the teams that Ohio State will see in the playoffs. Although I will say the one team that I think that could challenge Ohio State the most is not going to make the playoffs, and that's Miami. I think matchups matter, and so that's kind of interesting to me. I'm ready to pick this game, and I have give me a dartboard and a dart. Give me 2 darts. This is tough because unlike last year where I thought Indiana was a bit of a pretender who racked up a lot of points on awful teams but wasn't a great team, I do think Indiana's a great team, and I think they've earned whatever seed they get. I'm frustrated that they continue to cancel their out of conference games. I would have loved to see them play Virginia this year, for example. But and I'll say this before I pick this score because I've been really hard on Indiana this year. It's not Indiana's fault that the committee sucks. Indiana is playing the game. They are not being punished. They saw Michigan cancel a Power 4 out of conference game. I think it was against UCLA a few years ago, and replace them with a nobody and get an extra home game, get an extra win. And so they did it. And then next year, they don't play a Power 4 next year either. Until that gets punished, why wouldn't you do it? I don't blame them at all for doing it. So for all of my criticisms, and there are many, I don't blame them. I would do it too until directed otherwise. Having said that, I still think they're a great team. I just don't know if they're in this game better than Ohio State. I'm picking Ohio State in this game, and I reserve the right to pick Indiana if they have a rematch, which I think the odds of that are decently high. But I think there's going to be more points in this one. Give me 31. Give me Ohio State 31, Indiana 20. I'm going to go odd, 26.
I'm with you, Daniel, and I'm going to take Ohio State 24 over Indiana 20. I think this game's going to be a defensive slugfest. Honestly, I think both teams are going to struggle more just because they're not used with the level of competition. Indiana's a team, they gave up 8.7 to Kennesaw State in garbage time, but they otherwise haven't given up 8 yards an attempt all season. They stopped the run, and I think they're just going to strain Ohio State in ways they haven't seen. And honestly, this is going to be a good test for both teams to learn some things to go into the playoffs. To me, it's just about data. I don't know how this game's going to go, but I'm fascinated to see it. And like you said, I think the rematch, if and when it happens, is probably going to look a lot different than round one.
So let's talk about, just for a minute, if this game is not a defensive struggle. I think we've seen Ohio State likes to do the boa constrictor thing where, you talked a little bit about how Oklahoma, when they played Alabama needed to be patient because that's a really good defense. Oklahoma needed to be patient. And they just kind of sat back and let their team make mistakes. Ohio State did that against Michigan. And it was really interesting to watch because they executed the thing that they love to do. They were in their comfort zone. Michigan needed to be aggressive. Even if they're not going to win that game and it turns into a blowout, the only prayer they had was to be really aggressive, and they weren't. And that allowed Ohio State, because you're not, the thing I said at kind of around halftime is, and by the way, I tweeted earlier in the week, Ohio State does not lose if they're not getting beaten soundly at halftime. That's something to look out for this game too. They've had, I think, 5 one-score games or right there at halftime this year. The average score of those was 31-9. The average final score. Um, what Michigan needed to do was be really aggressive, and they were not. And ultimately, that boa constrictor sort of turned into actually could have been a lot bigger score than it was. Ohio State melted an entire quarter's worth of time on that one drive where they just ran it up the gut. Josh, I think Indiana might be that team that they don't really care. Like you said, it's an exhibition game, nothing to lose. Sig is kind of that guy that would do this. If Indiana comes out and is just kind of just tossing it all over the yard, really vertical, really aggressive defensively, they don't care if they lose because they're in the playoffs anyway. If they bring that mindset to the game, could you see it being a high scoring game, and could you see Indiana maybe winning if they went that route?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I'll say I'm probably not on video because my memory card just ran out, but we're running out of time anyway, so I'll just let it run, and you can put up a card or stare at Daniel's face, which is a lot prettier than mine. I think Indiana to win this game is going to have to be aggressive and pull out stops. They've got to be fearless. I think they're willing to do that. Ohio State, even in the Michigan game, right? They won that game, but they won that game in a pretty methodical fashion. I mean, we talked about playing tight. They had a bomb to Carnell Tate. They had one good long pass to Jeremiah Smith for 35 yards. But, they didn't really do a whole lot. They only completed 19 passes in that game. They ran the ball 47 times. It was a ground and pound game over Michigan. Not a bad strategy because, again, Michigan not quite the same as they have been defensively. They're, and once they had success on the ground, and it's a game where it was pouring snow, to be clear, in Ohio State's defense. It was what it was. But the question is Ohio State going to be tight in this game? And if you're Indiana, you might consider coming out and being really aggressive. And you can play a style of offense that I don't think Ohio State's seen. And then maybe you can get some touchdowns or get some momentum as they kind of adjust to the speed of the game or what they're facing and make Ohio State play outside their comfort zone. So, I mean, I certainly think they're past for Indiana to win this game. And again, the fascinating thing is everybody talks about how dominant Ohio State is, Daniel, and how much they blow out teams, and that's all true. But as of this week, Indiana is actually the highest rated team in FEI. Indiana is at 1.69, tied with Ohio State, and by some level of decimals beyond what even shows on the sheet, Indiana is actually higher rated. And in our model, our rating system, yeah, we favor Ohio State by 8 points. It's actually due a little bit to matchups and scaling. But, Ohio State's 1, Indiana's 2, and it's 131 wins to 129. Like, it's not a huge gap. 131 to 129 rating, right? So, there's a very good chance Indiana can win this game, and there's a very good chance that all of us are really underestimating how good Indiana is relative to Ohio State, because it's so easy to just say they haven't played anybody. And look, to a certain extent, they haven't played that many well-rounded teams outside of Oregon. And they beat, but you know what? They beat Oregon pretty bad, and we may overreact to beating a Penn State team close that we talk about a lot. Penn State's in that same realm as Florida, Auburn, to some extent Florida State. I know like teams that you play that have bad records, but they're high talent teams with some good units, and they've given a lot of people fits. They just find ways to lose repeatedly. And to give credit to Indiana, they actually went out and won that game. So, it won't shock me at all if Indiana is able to win. And it won't shock me at all, really, frankly, if we find out that Indiana is that team that none of us wanted to accept because everybody's so stuck into what we saw last year at the end of the season.
Yeah, and a lot of fans are complaining about brand bias. And I just... Look, I don't care what your logo is. I care what you've done on the field. And Indiana has a really good win against Oregon. They have, the best win in the Big Ten. But I am a little bit influenced by what happened last year. That doesn't have anything to do with the logo. I'm actually very excited for Indiana fans to potentially have that first Big Ten championship in 50 plus years. So, all right, let us know what you think the score is going to be in the comments, and let us know if we are wrong in saying that the stakes aren't that high for this game. And explain yourself, and we will read it. Thank you so much for hanging on this long. Y'all have a great week, and God bless.